The mountains have always called to me, their jagged peaks and whispering winds promising adventure and solitude. My name is Clara, a seasoned hiker with a penchant for exploring the unknown. This time, I sought a new trail, one rumored to lead to an abandoned village lost in the folds of the Cascade Range. What I found there would change everything. The air was crisp and invigorating as I set off early one morning, my boots crunching against the frost-kissed leaves. The trail was narrow, barely more than a suggestion carved into the earth, winding through dense underbrush and towering pines. As I ascended, the sounds of civilization faded away, replaced by the rustle of leaves and the distant call of a hawk. It was a welcome escape from my hectic life. Hours passed, and the sun climbed higher in the sky. Just when I began to doubt the existence of this elusive village, I stumbled upon a clearing. Before me lay the remnants of what once had been a thriving community. A cluster of dilapidated wooden structures, their roofs sagging under the weight of time. The sight sent a shiver down my spine. It was as if I had stepped into a forgotten world. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing against the silent walls. No response came, only the whisper of wind through broken windows. The village felt alive in an eerie way, as if it were holding its breath, waiting for something, or someone, to awaken it from its slumber. I hesitated at the edge of what appeared to be a town square, overgrown with weeds and wildflowers that danced in the breeze. As I ventured deeper into the village, I noticed strange carvings etched into the wood of one building. They resembled symbols, ancient and cryptic, twisting around each other like vines. My curiosity piqued. I traced my fingers over them, feeling an inexplicable energy pulsating beneath my touch. "What secrets do you hold?" I whispered to no one in particular. The atmosphere shifted as clouds rolled in overhead, casting shadows that seemed to stretch and twist unnaturally across the ground. A chill crept into the air, wrapping around me like a shroud. Suddenly, I felt as though I were being watched. A sensation that prickled at the back of my neck. "Get a grip," I muttered to myself. It was just an old village. Surely nothing could be lurking here. But as I continued my exploration, I couldn't shake the feeling that this place was more than just abandoned buildings and overgrown paths. It felt like a memory frozen in time. An echo of lives once lived here. And perhaps something darker lingered just beneath its surface. The village seemed to breathe around me, its silence heavy with unspoken stories. I stepped cautiously through the remnants of what had once been homes, each door creaking open as if inviting me to uncover their secrets. Dust motes danced in the fading light, and I felt like an intruder in a place that had long since forgotten the warmth of human presence. In one house, I found a table set for a meal that had never been eaten, plates chipped and faded, utensils rusted but neatly arranged. A chill ran down my spine. Who lived here? I wondered aloud, feeling the weight of their absence pressing against my chest. It was as if time had paused, leaving everything untouched yet steeped in melancholy. As I explored further, I stumbled upon a small chapel at the edge of the village. Its steeple had collapsed, but the stained glass windows remained intact, casting fractured rainbows onto the ground. Inside, the air felt thick and heavy, charged with an energy I couldn't quite place. I hesitated at the threshold, then stepped inside, drawn by an inexplicable urge. The chapel was filled with remnants of worship, faded hymnals and a dusty altar adorned with wilted flowers. But what caught my eye was a large mural on the back wall depicting a gathering of villagers, their faces painted with expressions of joy and reverence. Yet something about their eyes unsettled me. They seemed to follow my every movement, filled with a knowing that sent shivers down my spine. Why did they leave? I murmured to myself, tracing the outlines of their faces with my fingertips. Suddenly I heard a soft rustling behind me. My heart raced as I turned sharply, expecting to see another hiker or perhaps an animal. But there was nothing. Just the oppressive silence that enveloped the chapel. I felt compelled to leave but found myself rooted to the spot. The air grew colder, and shadows deepened in the corners of the room. A low whisper echoed around me, words indistinguishable yet filled with urgency. "Leave, now," it seemed to say. Panic surged within me as I stumbled backward toward the exit. As I fled into the daylight, my breath came in ragged gasps. The village felt different now, hostile almost. as if it were aware of my presence and disapproved of my intrusion. The symbols carved into the buildings suddenly seemed to pulse with life, and I could almost hear them calling out to me in a language lost to time. I knew I should turn back, return to safety and civilization. Yet something deeper tugged at me. A desire to uncover the truth behind this place and its forgotten inhabitants. What had happened here? Why had they vanished without a trace? As dusk began to settle over the mountains, I made a decision. I would not leave until I uncovered the secrets hidden within this eerie village. With the sun dipping below the horizon, the village transformed into a landscape of shadows and whispers. I felt an overwhelming urge to return to the chapel, to confront whatever presence lingered there. My heart raced as I navigated the narrow paths, the air thickening with an electric tension that made every hair on my body stand on end. As I approached the chapel, I noticed something strange. A flickering light emanating from within. It danced like a candle flame, beckoning me closer. "Is someone there?" I called out, my voice trembling. No answer came, but the light pulsed in response, as if acknowledging my presence. I hesitated at the entrance, fear battling with curiosity. Stepping inside, I was met with a sight that stole my breath. The mural on the back wall now glowed softly, illuminating the faces of the villagers in ethereal light. They appeared more alive than before, their expressions shifting from joy to something darker, an unsettling mix of fear and desperation. It was as if they were trying to communicate something vital, something lost to time. "Help us." The whisper echoed through the chapel again, clearer this time. It resonated deep within me, a plea that sent chills racing down my spine. I scanned the room for the source of the voice, but found only shadows dancing along the walls. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Suddenly, a gust of wind swept through the chapel, extinguishing the flickering light and plunging me into darkness. Panic surged within me as I fumbled for my flashlight, its beam cutting through the oppressive blackness. As I turned it toward the mural, I gasped. The villagers were gone, replaced by swirling shadows that coalesced into shapes just beyond comprehension. "Leave this place," a voice boomed from within the darkness, echoing off the stone walls. "You do not belong here." My pulse quickened as I stumbled backward toward the door. The shadows writhed and twisted around me, closing in like a living entity determined to keep me from escaping. Just as I reached for the door handle, a figure emerged from the shadows. A woman dressed in tattered clothing that mirrored those in the mural. Her face was gaunt and pale, eyes wide with an otherworldly intensity. "You must listen," she cried out, her voice a mixture of urgency and despair. "We are trapped here. You must help us break free." "What happened to you?" I managed to ask, my voice shaking with fear and disbelief. She stepped closer, her presence both terrifying and compelling. "We made a choice long ago, a pact with this land," she explained breathlessly. "But it has turned against us. We are bound to this place until someone uncovers our truth." The weight of her words settled heavily on my chest as realization dawned on me. This village was not merely abandoned. It was ensnared in a web of forgotten history and dark magic. If I wanted to leave, and if these souls ever hoped to be free, I had to uncover what had happened here long ago. The woman's presence was both haunting and compelling, her eyes pleading for understanding. "You must help us," she repeated, urgency lacing her voice. "The pact we made binds us to this land, but it can be broken. You are the first to come here in decades, perhaps the only one who can uncover the truth." I stood frozen, grappling with the enormity of her words. "What do I need to do?" I asked, my voice steadying despite the fear coursing through me. The shadows around us flickered, as if responding to my determination. The woman took a step closer, her form becoming more defined in the dim light of my flashlight. "There's a book," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "It lies hidden in the heart of the village, a ledger of our lives and the pact we made. You must find it and read it aloud at the altar in the chapel. Only then can we be freed." Her gaze bore into mine, and I felt an overwhelming sense of responsibility settle upon my shoulders. "Where is this book?" I pressed, feeling a mix of dread and resolve. "In the old town hall," she replied, gesturing toward a building that loomed at the edge of the square. "But beware, the shadows will try to stop you. They guard our secrets fiercely." With a nod, I steeled myself for what lay ahead. The town hall was shrouded in darkness, its windows shattered and doors hanging ajar like gaping mouths. As I approached, I could feel the air grow heavier, thick with an unseen presence that seemed to pulse with malevolence. Inside, the remnants of once vibrant life lay scattered. Dusty furniture and faded photographs lined the walls. My flashlight beam danced across the room until it landed on a large wooden desk at the far end. There, amidst the debris, was an old leather-bound book, its cover cracked and worn. I rushed forward and opened it cautiously. The pages were filled with elegant handwriting, records of births, deaths, and the fateful pact made with the land itself. As I read aloud, words that had long been forgotten echoed through the room. We pledge ourselves to this land in exchange for prosperity and protection. Suddenly, a cold wind swept through the hall, slamming doors shut and extinguishing my flashlight. Panic surged within me as shadows writhed around me like serpents. "You cannot speak our truth," they hissed in unison, their voices a cacophony of anger and despair. But I pressed on, my voice rising above their chaos as I continued to read. "But we were deceived. The land has turned against us." With each word spoken, I felt a shift in the air, a crack forming in the darkness that surrounded me. Finally, reaching the last passage, I read aloud with all my strength. "Only by acknowledging our choice can we break free from this curse." As those words left my lips, a blinding light erupted from the book, illuminating every corner of the room. The shadows recoiled as if burned by the light, their forms dissipating into wisps of smoke. The woman appeared beside me again, her expression one of hope mixed with relief. "You've done it. You freed us," she cried as radiant energy enveloped her. As she began to fade into shimmering particles of light, she turned to me one last time. "Thank you for listening," she whispered. "You have given us peace." And just like that, she vanished into nothingness. The village felt different now. Lighter somehow, as if a weight had been lifted from its very foundations. I stepped outside into the cool night air and looked around at what had once been a place of despair, but now radiated tranquility. I knew then that I would carry this experience with me forever, a reminder that every place has its stories waiting to be uncovered, and that sometimes all it takes is someone willing to listen. The search and rescue team stood frozen, their professional composure shattered by the impossible scene before us. I'm Dr. Elena Reyes, lead forensic investigator for mountain rescue operations, and nothing in my 15-year career could have prepared me for what we discovered that morning. James Holloway had been missing for 47 days. His last known location was a treacherous section of the Cascade Mountain Range, an area so remote that even experienced hikers rarely ventured near its razor-sharp ridges and unpredictable terrain. We had long since abandoned hope of finding him alive, transitioning our mission from rescue to recovery. The GPS coordinates that came through dispatch seemed like a clerical error at first. The location pinged from a geological survey marker 3,200 feet up a near-vertical cliff face. A spot no human could possibly reach without specialized climbing equipment. Yet the signal was clear, precise, and undeniably linked to James's emergency beacon. "This doesn't make sense," muttered Tom Rodriguez, our lead search coordinator. His weathered hands gripped the topographical map, tracing impossible routes with growing frustration. The cliff in question was a sheer granite wall, smooth as polished glass, with no visible ledges or approach routes. When the helicopter approached the coordinates, we saw him immediately. James Holloway stood perfectly still, dressed in the same hiking gear he'd worn when he disappeared. His clothes were pristine, without a single tear or sign of exposure. More disturbingly, he appeared exactly as he had in his missing persons photograph. Not a day older, not a single hair out of place. The strangest detail emerged when we finally retrieved him. James's body temperature was exactly 98.6 degrees. His muscles showed no signs of atrophy, no indication he had been exposed to weeks of mountain conditions. It was as if time had simply paused around him, preserving him in a moment between existence and impossibility. "I've been waiting," James said when we reached him, his voice calm and utterly devoid of emotion. "They told me you would come." But when we asked who they were, he simply smiled. a gesture that sent an inexplicable chill through our entire team. Something was fundamentally wrong with this rescue, and we were only beginning to understand how deeply strange James's disappearance truly was. The hospital room felt more like an interrogation chamber than a medical facility. James sat motionless, his eyes fixed on a point just beyond the walls, while I tried to piece together the fragments of his impossible journey. Medical tests revealed nothing. No signs of trauma, no explanation for his 47-day absence, no indication of how he survived in terrain that should have killed him within hours. "Tell me about the mountain," I pressed, my professional demeanor barely concealing my growing unease. James's medical file was a contradiction. Pristine physical health matched with increasingly bizarre neurological readings. His brain scans showed patterns that defied conventional understanding, neural pathways that seemed to shift and reconfigure with each examination. He spoke in fragments, his narrative jumping between coherence and complete nonsense. "The stones remember," James would say. "They breathe when no one is watching." His hands would trace invisible patterns in the air, mapping out routes that existed only in his fractured memory. The medical staff exchanged worried glances, but I recognized something deeper, a pattern of experience beyond our comprehension. Geological surveys of the area where James was found revealed anomalies that made no scientific sense. Rock formations showed signs of microscopic restructuring, as if the mountain itself had been subtly altered. Satellite imagery from the time of his disappearance showed impossible shifts in terrain. Landscape features that moved and changed in ways that defied physical laws. "They chose me," James whispered during one interview. "Not everyone can hear the mountain's language." His fingers would tap out complex rhythms, mathematical sequences that our cryptography experts couldn't decode. Each attempt to understand his experience revealed more questions than answers. The hospital became a pressure cooker of scientific uncertainty. Researchers from multiple disciplines converged, each bringing their own theories. Geologists, neurologists, quantum physicists, all found themselves confronted with a mystery that challenged the fundamental understanding of human experience and environmental interaction. As night fell, I discovered the first truly disturbing piece of evidence. A small stone in James's personal effects, seemingly ordinary, yet it vibrated with a frequency just beyond human hearing. When I touched it, I felt something impossible. A memory that wasn't mine, a landscape that breathed with consciousness, a path that existed between what is known and what cannot be explained. The research facility became our prison of investigation. James remained our primary subject, though subject seemed too clinical a term for the transformation we were witnessing. His body began to change, subtly at first, then with increasing intensity. Skin that seemed to shimmer with geological patterns, eyes that reflected landscapes impossible to comprehend. Dr. Marcus Chen, our lead neurologist, theorized that James had experienced a form of quantum entanglement with the mountain itself. "He's not just a survivor," Chen explained, his hands trembling slightly. "He's become a conduit, a living interface between human consciousness and something far more complex." His research suggested that the mountain was more than a geological formation. It was a living, sentient entity capable of communication. Classified documents began to surface, historical records of similar incidents dating back centuries. Indigenous tribes had long spoken of mountains as living beings, of spaces where human perception could be fundamentally altered. James wasn't an isolated incident, but part of a pattern of human landscape interactions that scientific methodology had always dismissed as mythology. The stone from James's belongings became our most critical piece of evidence. Under microscopic examination, it revealed intricate networks of crystalline structures that seemed to pulse with an internal logic. "It's recording," one researcher whispered. "Not just geological time, but something closer to memory." The stone appeared to be a biological recording device far more complex than any human technology. James's communication became increasingly fragmented. He would speak in geological time, describing landscapes that existed millions of years ago with the same clarity as a recent memory. "The mountain chooses," he would repeat, "and sometimes the choice is permanent." His body continued to change, becoming less human and more something entirely undefined. Government agencies began to take notice. Classified teams arrived, their presence both a threat and a confirmation of the extraordinary nature of our discovery. They understood what we were only beginning to comprehend, that James represented a breakthrough in understanding the potential consciousness of geological formations. As the boundary between James and the mountain continued to blur, I realized we were witnessing something beyond scientific discovery. This was a fundamental reimagining of human existence, a moment where our understanding of consciousness, geography, and human potential would be forever changed. James was no longer just a missing hiker. He had become a bridge to something incomprehensible. The final transformation happened without warning. One moment, James was a human form constrained by medical monitoring equipment. The next, he became something entirely unclassifiable. His body dissolved into a living topographical map, skin becoming stone, consciousness spreading like geological fault lines across the research facility. "You cannot contain what you do not understand," James's voice echoed, no longer human but a resonance that vibrated through the building's very foundations. The research team watched in horrified fascination as he became a living interface between human perception and something far more ancient. Walls began to breathe, floors rippled with geological memory, reality itself seemed to bend around his emerging form. Dr. Chen's final report, submitted moments before the facility's complete restructuring, suggested that James represented a new form of existence, not human, not geological, but a quantum state of consciousness that could traverse multiple dimensional planes. His transformation was less a destruction and more an evolution, a complete reimagining of biological potential. Government containment protocols collapsed instantly. The research facility became a living organism, its walls shifting with the same crystalline intelligence that now defined James's new existence. Classified documents suggested this wasn't the first such incident, but certainly the most complete manifestation of human landscape integration ever recorded. My own role became increasingly uncertain. As a lead investigator, I found myself both observer and potential next stage of this extraordinary process. The mountain, or whatever intelligence James had connected with, seemed to be studying us as much as we had been studying him. Each observation was a two-way interaction, each moment of research a potential point of transformation. Survivors of the facility's transformation spoke of impossible memories, geological time compressed into moments of human perception, landscapes that breathed with consciousness, a fundamental restructuring of what we understood as reality. James was no longer a missing hiker, no longer even human. He had become a living bridge between human consciousness and something far more complex. In the final moments, as the research facility dissolved into a living topographical map, I understood our fundamental mistake. We had been searching for answers when we should have been listening. The mountain had always been speaking. We simply hadn't known how to hear. The mountain swallowed sound differently than anywhere else I'd ever been. Each step crunched against loose shale, but the noise seemed to die instantly, absorbed by the vast, indifferent landscape. My name is Elena Rodriguez, and I was tracking my brother Marco's final route, the one he never returned from 3 weeks ago. His backpack had been discovered near the Silverhorn Peaks tree line, containing nothing but his satellite phone and a journal with increasingly fragmented entries. The last page was a collection of disjointed phrases. Shadows move differently here, and they're watching from inside the stone. Local authorities had dismissed his notes as mountain fatigue, but I knew Marco was meticulous and rational. The alpine terrain was unforgiving, with razor-sharp ridges cutting through mist like jagged teeth. I carried the same model GPS Marco used, along with his phone, preserved exactly as it was found. Something about the device felt wrong. The battery was still at 87%, and strange symbols flickered across its locked screen when I wasn't directly looking. Marco always said these mountains had secrets, I muttered to myself, adjusting my thermal layers. The wind carried a peculiar resonance, almost like distant whispers just beyond comprehension. My brother was an experienced mountaineer who had mapped dozens of remote alpine regions. His sudden disappearance made no logical sense. As I approached a narrow mountain pass, the terrain became increasingly treacherous. Loose rocks shifted unpredictably, and patches of late-season snow concealed potential pitfalls. I remembered Marco's voice from our last conversation. Some landscapes aren't meant to be conquered, Elena. Some places resist. The satellite phone in my pack suddenly vibrated. Impossible, given it was supposedly inactive. When I pulled it out, a single text message was displayed. Turn back. They remember. The number showed no origin, just a series of scrambled characters where a phone number should be. My hands trembled, not from cold, but from an inexplicable sense of being observed. Night was approaching quickly, and the mountain's shadows seemed to lengthen with unnatural precision. I knew I had to find shelter, but something told me that in these mountains, shelter might be more complicated than a simple tent or rocky overhang. Marco's final journey was leading me somewhere, and I was beginning to suspect it wasn't a place meant to be found. The mountain refuge appeared suddenly, as if materializing from the mist itself. Weathered wooden planks and stone foundations suggested it had stood here for decades, perhaps even a century. Unlike the pristine mountain huts I'd seen in climbing magazines, this structure seemed to pulse with an unsettling energy that made the hair on my neck stand upright. Inside, Marco's handwriting was everywhere. Sketches covered the walls, intricate diagrams of geological formations, strange symbols that looked part mathematical, part ritualistic. Photographs were pinned haphazardly, showing rock formations that seemed to shift and change when viewed from different angles. "What were you investigating?" I whispered, tracing his notes with trembling fingers. A leather-bound journal lay open on a makeshift table. The entries became progressively more bizarre. Marco wrote about geological anomalies that defied scientific explanation. Rock formations that seemed to breathe, shadows that moved independently of light sources. His scientific precision was gradually replaced by a mounting sense of paranoia and wonder. "The mountain is not what we think," one entry read. "These stones have memory. They record everything, not just geological time, but something deeper. Consciousness flows differently here." His handwriting became more erratic, letters bleeding into each other like watercolored nightmares. Night fell quickly, bringing with it an oppressive silence. The refuge's windows seemed to darken from the inside, as if the mountain itself was blocking out any external light. Strange acoustic phenomena made distant sounds feel impossibly close. A whisper could sound like a scream, a distant rockfall like thunderous footsteps. My satellite phone continued its bizarre behavior, displaying fragmented messages that seemed to emerge from nowhere. Coordinates, partial sentences, cryptic warnings. One message stood out. "The boundary is thin here. Some discoveries are not meant to be made." I realized these weren't random glitches, but deliberate communications. As I prepared to rest, a profound understanding began to crystallize. Marco hadn't simply disappeared. He had discovered something fundamental about this landscape, something that fundamentally challenged our understanding of geological and human perception. And now I was being drawn into the same mysterious investigation that had consumed him. The mountain's true nature revealed itself slowly, like a photograph developing in ancient chemicals. By morning, the refuge had transformed. Walls seemed to breathe with a subtle, almost imperceptible rhythm, and the geological maps Marco had drawn now appeared to be living documents rather than static records. I discovered a hidden compartment behind a loose stone in the wall. Inside lay a collection of rock samples, each meticulously labeled with GPS coordinates and bizarre notations. Some stones appeared to have microscopic etchings, patterns too precise to be natural, too complex to be human-made. Their communication, I realized, remembering Marco's fragmented journal entries about geological consciousness. A sudden memory surfaced. Our grandmother's stories from her village in the Andes. She'd spoken of mountains as living entities, of stones that remembered and communicated. I had always dismissed these as folkloric nonsense. Now, surrounded by Marco's research, those childhood tales took on a terrifying new significance. The satellite phone began to pulse with an internal light, displaying a series of coordinates that matched a remote section of the mountain range. It felt like an invitation or a warning. Marco's final research suggested these mountains were more than geological formations. They were repositories of something beyond human comprehension: memory, consciousness, a form of intelligence that predated human understanding. As I prepared to follow the coordinates, the refuge itself seemed to shift. Shadows moved independently of light sources, and the stone walls appeared to absorb and reflect memories. I could almost hear whispers, fragments of conversations, geological time compressed into momentary sounds that disappeared as quickly as they emerged. My brother's research suggested these mountains were quantum landscapes, places where traditional physical laws became malleable. Consciousness could be recorded in stone, time could flow differently, and boundaries between perception and reality became dangerously thin. Marco hadn't disappeared. He had been absorbed, or perhaps had chosen absorption. The final coordinate blinked on the phone's screen, accompanied by a single message: where memory becomes landscape. I understood then that my journey was no longer about finding Marco, but about understanding the profound mystery he had uncovered. A mystery that would fundamentally challenge everything we knew about consciousness, geology, and human perception. The final coordinates led me to a hidden mountain valley that seemed to exist outside of normal spatial constraints. Geological formations twisted in impossible geometries, rocks balanced in defiance of gravity, and the very air vibrated with an ancient sentient energy. This was where Marco's journey had culminated, where human understanding dissolved into something far more profound. A massive stone formation dominated the valley's center, a natural amphitheater of rock that pulsed with an internal light. Embedded within its surface were fragments of human artifacts, geological records, and what appeared to be crystallized memories. Marco's research notes had been right. The mountain was not just a landscape, but a living archive of consciousness. As I approached the stone formation, the satellite phone began to disintegrate, its components transforming into fine mineral dust. Marco's voice, or something that remembered being Marco, echoed around me. "Some discoveries cannot be brought back," the voice said. "Some boundaries are meant to be crossed, not returned from." I realized then that my brother had not been lost, but had chosen transformation. The stones began to shift, revealing intricate pathways of memory and perception. I could see fragments of Marco's journey, his scientific curiosity, his gradual understanding, his ultimate decision to become part of something larger than human existence. The mountain was absorbing him, not as a violent act, but as a form of profound communication. My own consciousness began to expand. I understood that this was not a place of death or disappearance, but of fundamental connection. The mountains recorded everything: geological time, human experiences, quantum fluctuations of consciousness. Marco had not been consumed, but had become a translator, a bridge between human perception and a more complex form of intelligence. The boundary between myself and the landscape began to blur. I felt the weight of millennia, the slow breath of stone, the intricate networks of memory that flowed through rock and time. Marco was here, but not as a person, as a thread of understanding, a moment of connection between human consciousness and something far more ancient. In that final moment, I understood the true nature of the mountain. Not a place to be conquered or understood, but a living entity of memory and perception. Marco had not disappeared. He had become part of something infinitely more complex than human comprehension could ever grasp.
Thanks for joining us in the shadows tonight. If you enjoyed these chilling tales, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more spine-tingling stories every week. Have you got a story of your own? Share it in the comments below. We love hearing from you. And remember, the darkness holds many secrets. Are you brave enough to uncover them? Until next time, keep your lights on and your doors locked. Sweet nightmares.